Hello and welcome to the June 1st edition of the Cluster API Provider AWS Office Hours, a sub-project of both Cluster API and State Cluster Lifecycle. Just a reminder to all that this meeting is recorded and will be posted up to YouTube after the conclusion of the meeting. And we also adhere to the Kubernetes community guidelines. So in general, please be excellent to one another. To start with, I'd say the PSA that I would have is we're still looking to finalize any last PRs that anyone would have for the next release. I think it's version 0.5.4 off the top of my head. If I know there was one outstanding PR that we were kind of waiting on, but I haven't seen any of the comments addressed yet. So if anybody has any PRs that they're interested in getting into the release, please let me know. Otherwise, I will go ahead and start the process of cutting that release, and then we can get back to some of the bigger PRs that are out there, like the one to change the default subnetting logic and that sort of stuff, because those have been kind of waiting for the release to go out before we try to dig into those in more detail. That said, we move on to the group topics. Does anybody have anything? Because we're kind of empty on the agenda right now.
Nadir, you want to give an update on the multi-tenancy thing and the cluster AWS ADM refactoring?
I was just about to say, oh yeah, yes. So the multi-tenancy proposal has been merged. I'm beginning work on that right now as we speak. I know that Capital One have been working on the implementation as well, so I'll probably will sync up whenever they've got something. And the other big thing I've been working on is a revamp of cluster AWS ADM. Put the link in a minute. So the main use case for that was to provide APIs if you wanted to consume that programmatically. But it's also going to drop the alpha prefixes and move to using a configuration file. The idea is to give customization around what the roles are called, being able to add extra policies, setting up trust policies if you're doing it in a assume role manner, which will be important to people using multi-tenancy use case. So you'll be able to either generate CloudFormation templates or spit out the IAM policy documents and consume that in Terraform or whatever. So there is a draft PR, there is a PR for the cluster AWS ADM, so please take a look.
Alrighty, thank you, Nadir. Any other group topics for today? I see, Robert, you just added private subnets. Oh, looks like you're talking.
Oh, I'm double muted. Nice. All right, sorry. So what I was saying is, yes, private subnets. So there's a couple issues out there. I think some of them are actually dupes. And there's a pull request, and that's 1721, which I think might address this problem. And then that seems to be related to a couple other issues. But essentially, the logic right now is to just loop through private subnets. And I believe recently there was a bug fix so that loop through would only take one from each availability zone, but it's still sort of a crapshoot which of those private subnets in each availability zone it gets. And so trying to get better visibility into sort of picking those, because if you create like 7 or 8 private subnets, which a lot of times happens, and you have sort of a quote public and private subnet, even though they're both actually private, just sort of trying to cherry pick where the load balancers go into those private subnets. And so I think that in the conversation, why am I bringing this up? Specifically in the conversation, it seemed to shift towards specifying it in the spec file versus specifying it with tags. And so trying to get better visibility and discussion on what people might think is the right direction there or so.
Yeah, and I know that we had some that were, I have to look at the actual PRs to refamiliarize myself, but I know that we had like one PR that was out there that would just limit the subnets that were returned. So instead of having all discovered subnets returned, only the ones that were specified. The challenge with altering that behavior will be ensuring that we don't break any existing clusters that may be relying on the default behavior that we have today. So that's the tricky part about that behavior change. And then we had the other one, which would change the default handling of creation of subnets as well. And that's something that we've been wanting to do, but we need to make sure that as we do that, that we don't break existing clusters as well. So that's part of my rationale for trying to go ahead and get version 0.5.4 out the door, because with any of these changes, there's the potential for breakage. And once we get that release cut, then we can go ahead and, try to manage the risk a little bit better. But I definitely, anybody who has time to review and provide feedback on those PRs, please go ahead and do so, because I know that there are various use cases that we have that we aren't meeting today that we would like to, but we also want to make sure that we're not breaking existing use cases that people are relying on as well. So we may need to make it potentially opt-in behavior for the new behavior, at least on the subnet lookups. But we might be able to, I'm not sure on the default subnetting logic if we'll need to make that opt-in or if there's a safe way that we can enable that without breaking the backward compatibility.
So that means that the next release would allow private subnets, or would allow working in multiple subnets where you multiple private subnets in each availability zone, but it would still be random which one sort of got picked.
Potentially. We need to weigh those 3 PRs that were linked in the notes and try to, figure out which, is there an ordering that we're looking at to land these as far as priority, and, how we want to take that. So I know your feedback would be great, Robert, but I know also others that have been involved will have, we'll want to make sure to get feedback as well, such as Seth and Andrew, the New Relic folks. And I think Nadir probably has some feedback on it as well. Seth?
Yeah, I just wanted to throw out there that the filtering behavior would probably be fine for us because we don't like we populate Cappy or Kappa rather populates the subnets that it discovers back into the spec. And so all of our existing clusters that we didn't specify things like have long since been sort of filled out by that discovery code. And I think our current tooling is doing the correct population today. So I think that for that perspective, we'd be doing okay. We also don't use much of like, we've tried it once or twice, but the like default creation stuff is not really a thing that we use. So I can't speak so much to that one, but.
All right. Nadir, do you have anything to add on this topic?
No, not right now. I will need to read. In terms of sorting, I just lexicographical probably is fine, I suppose. Yeah, I think you need to. One thing we should note, we probably should add that to our documents on managing AWS resources. That whenever you do a describe, order is always random when we get stuff back. So don't ever make decisions based on that.
Alrighty. Anybody else? Any other group topics? Were you actually able to get in this time, Andrew? I see you in the participants now.
Yeah, I think so. I had to join from the browser. Like, the app is just no good.
All right. Well, we can try again next meeting. I think if you're in the browser, I'm not going to force you to try to do anything. I know it's much more limited. Let me switch over, share my screen, and we can go ahead and jump into the triage, I think.
Cool. Thanks, Jason.
Yep. All right. So hopefully my browser window is showing up now. On to the issues with no milestone. AWS cluster attempts to change the immutable fields spec control plane endpoint. Do you have a chance to look into this a bit more, Nadir?
Yeah, actually, I did have. We had a chat on Slack, I think, a couple of weeks ago. So I think, and I probably just need to check with them, but I think it's resolved for them. I think they've found a way to do what they wanted to do. I'll gather the notes and put that in.
All right, sounds good. Thank you. Segfault when additional security groups, when using additional security groups with filters. Oh, yeah. Multi-Z machine deployment. Seth, did you want to provide an update on this one?
I sure would like to remember what the update is.
That's
don't
fine.
think I have one, sorry.
That's fine. We can go ahead and address it. I think the biggest thing I'd be looking for is whether or not this is something that we're potentially looking at for as a non-breaking change, or if it would be some that we would have to put in as a breaking change. We'll spin back around to that when we can. All right, SSH name is not correctly set in some cases. This is the one that we have the open PR for. And add conditions to AWS machine. This is a new one that came in and is aligning with the conditions cap. So are there any issues that or PRs that anybody thinks we need to look into before we call it? If not, then thank you all. We'll see you in another 2 weeks.